Hey guys, welcome back to part 3 of our dash and trunk base segment. So what we're going to try and do in this video, we're going to roll through a few more parts and pieces on the car. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to take the real simple ones out there and get those put into place. I don't really need a whole lot of explaining as to how they go on and anything technical about them. So that'll save us a little bit of time there just for setting them up. And then we can spend a little bit more time talking about our ignition switch here and light switch assembly and hooking those up and leave a little bit more time for that. It's a little bit more important there. So first let's just take a look. Let's see what we got here. We'll explain what I've done to restore them and then take them out there and put them on. So our first thing here, this is our cowl vent trim and screen. And what I did to restore this, basically sandblasting, epoxy primer, and then I used our 2K satin finish on top of that. Gives it a real nice finish look. And then also finished out our screw heads. So you can see that one silver screw there. What I'm going to do before I run these screws in there and run the risk of possibly damaging the paint with a screwdriver, I'm going to pre-run in the one screw. Once I've got the holes opened up and I feel like they'll thread in okay, then I'll go ahead and run in the painted screws. And then we have our air plenum here. This has been refinished. What I've done to refinish this, re-resined it a couple times, sanded it up, and then shot some clear coat on there and put a new seal on there from Stoddard. Real nice fitting seal there. And then refinished our hardware, new chrome nut on there, POR 15 on our clamp. And then also I'm going to use a felt liner to hold that in place. This is just old, a little bit brittle. I don't want to apply too much pressure there. And then we have our original hood hinges here. These have been sandblasted, same thing with the epoxy primer and base coat, clear coat, and then refinishing our hardware there. And our gas tank funnel and overflow tube. This one's real simple to put in place. And then also we have our original fuse block printout here. And so for now I'll probably leave that off the car while we're doing troubleshooting. In case I blow a fuse, I can see exactly what's going on there. Then we have our hood latch release here. You've seen this one put in our engine bay segment. Installation on this is going to be exactly the same. And then we'll finish up with our ignition switch and light assembly. Okay, let me get outside, put some of these parts on, and we can roll through it, take a look at it. Alright, so let's first take a quick look at our plenum / drain here and see how that works before we close it up on top. So putting it in place, no problem. Real tight getting it in here. And I did take advantage of the hanger and route my squirter hosing through there. And that seems like a real good place to hold that in position so we don't have any interference with our wiper assembly movement of those arms there. That's going to work out real good for that. And then, so what happens is, so fresh air and water coming up the hood, water's collected in this drain, and it makes its way towards this end. You see the hole in there. And then out through the bottom of the car via this hose. If you have one of these original hoses, I'd hang on to it. Real hard to find these, and not made anymore. You'd have to go with something, just a real standard looking hose there. But anyways, that's the way it gets rid of the excess water, completely sealed here up against the cowl of the car. So then what happens is you have warm air rising up through your defrosters from your 50mm tubes and your shared smaller tubes in the center here. And then when you open your flap, opening that flap will bring fresh air in and mix it with your warm air up on your defrosters up here. So that's how that whole system works in there. Really got to be sealed up good with a good seal around your plenum and a good working flap. Okay, let's go ahead and close this up, see what that looks like. Alright, so we got a real nice finished look going here now. I guess really the only thing you would want to worry about on this one, real simple to install. It would be very easy to over torque those screws as our sheet metal and screen is really quite thin and fragile. So just snugging that down until you get it where it needs to be and then stop. Alright, and then next we're going to go ahead and put our hinges on. So while we're down here looking at this area, Let's look at this wiring here. So on our previous video, I had the wires coming out of this location here, but actually, after reviewing some old photographs, the wire should be coming out resting on top of the 50mm tubing up here. And the reason that is because over time the wire can be supported up there and you don't have any kind of pressure against our foam. If it's down in this location here, eventually you're going to get a sag there in the foam, and then you'll have a breach. And then our hinge is sitting in place. So I've just got these bolts just slightly snug for now, as they're going to be moving around quite a bit once we get our hood in place and start adjusting. And then the driver's side hinge. I got a little glare coming in here, but take a look at the engineering in this hinge and how it works with everything else going on around it. Clearances they're using, and the bends and folds in the metal. Just amazing. Alright, let's take a look at our fuel overflow tube here and see how that looks. So, the only thing I did extra that it didn't have when I pulled the car apart, there was no grommet or any kind of interior protection here where the aluminum passes through the body. So I just wrapped an extra sleeve. I split it and slid it through that opening there. Otherwise you won't be able to get it all the way threaded up in there. Quite a long pull. You can see the cut in there. That'll just keep it from vibrating in that area. And then our overflow tube that goes to the gas tank goes out to here. And then to go through the body, coming down through that section, down through the body, and then out the bottom. This hole down here really tight, and it was also squished in there from our original photography when I took the car apart. So this area is almost like sealed off from the outside elements. How I got that in there, I went ahead and ran a split cut on the bottom about 6 inches, and then greased it up with some rubber grease, and just went ahead and squeezed it through, pulled like crazy, and eventually got it to go in there. So now that we're down in there, we can clean that up and then go ahead and cut it to length. So let's take a close-up look here at our hood latch release and see what we're doing here to set this guy up for safe installation. So I've gone ahead and greased the inside of the mechanism, moved it around real good, and everything seems to be working real good there. And so what I've done, I've taken a slurry coat of contact cement and run it around all contact surface area that's going to sit down on our finished paint. The reason we want to do something like this, you could use a contact cement, you could use our body seam sealer, would work fine also with this. The main thing is that it dries up really good and has no adhesive qualities to it after it's set up. So really what we want is we want a rubberized barrier between the latch and the finished paint. So if I didn't put something on there, we run a very high risk of cracking, splitting, or popping that paint when we torque down those bolts. What could happen, the outside perimeter edge of this plate could have a high spot, could have a little pointy hard bit on there, and the second we torque it down, it's going to dig right into that paint and it's going to go. So what this does is just hopefully protects us, keeps us out of hot water, and gets us through it safely. So here's a look at our cable coming through this section here. This area here, we don't really have a lot of space in there from the backside to thread that in there and tighten it down. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pull it through and go ahead and get it in location loose as I drop this into place. And then once this is in place and nutted down, we'll go around the backside and set the adjustment and tighten it down. So I can feel the rubberized membrane there, giving us a little protection on that paint. I'm not feeling any gritty or pointy hard bits digging down into our paint. So I think we're going to be okay there. And set that down and very carefully put those bolts in there. And then also I've run a tap down those threads before we started to thread these in here just to clean out the paint. Make sure everything's going to go in real smooth. And then for now I'm going to just tighten these bolts down until they stop. We'll do the fine-tune adjustment after our hood's in place and we need to adjust everything out together. Okay, so we got through that one safely. Don't think we're going to have any issues there. Also, the cable and knob at the dashboard pulling really nice. And then our release cable at the dashboard, working real good there. Okay, strike one more off the list. And then a real simple one here. So we have our ground wire coming out the door pocket here. So that just connects on the rear of our switch, and that'll just thread in location here. Let me go ahead and thread that in there. And then this also gets a finishing rubber cap over the top. Put that in there and take a look at it. Alright, there we go. Doesn't get any simpler than that. Okay, so while we're over here in this corner, let's go ahead and start doing our ignition switch, our light switch, and also our cigarette lighter location here. So you can see I got some of the wires already coming out of our harness from our steering column, already plugged in. We'll take a closer look at those here in a minute with some labeling here. Let's go in the shop, take a look at those switches on the bench, and see if we can't get a little bit better understanding of them. So here's a close-up look at our ignition switch, light switch, and then also our cigarette lighter. And all this wiring is pre-labeled. Nothing specific to Porsche as far as the wiring and numbers go there, sequence. That's just something I put on there when I disassembled the car just to get me back in position. So I think what we'll do, we'll take a look at the back side. That way you can make a good understanding of positioning and colors from the location of the switch. And then we get these outside installed, and then we can have a little bit better look how they plug in. So my ignition switch, I took this guy apart here. To get this apart, there's a retainer clip in the center of this guy here. Little micro retainer clip. You can pry that out of there and pull out the key set. Will slide right out of there. I'm going to stick a couple pictures in here also so you can see what all these components look like taken apart. If you take your ignition switch apart, make sure you take lots and lots of pictures, do lots of labeling, and be very careful in the space you're working in. The parts inside of here, the springs, the retainer clips, everything is so micro small. If you drop one of those on the floor, I don't think you'll ever find it. Just got to go real slow with this one and real careful. However, if you get it apart, internally, real strong mechanism in there. There's a triangular set of points, and one of those point contacts has a tendency to wear. What you can do is you can rotate that and get a little bit more mileage out of it. Lube it up, put it back together. You should be back in good shape. Okay, let me slide a couple pictures in here, what this looks like, and we'll take it outside on the car and put it in. So you can see by those pictures, parts inside this ignition switch really small. Alright, let's take a look at the back side of our wiring, see how everything hooks up. So here's our cigarette lighter, and this is following our harness. There's a lead coming out of there, kind of a long, skinny lead. It's got one red wire and one ground, and then this ground here is going to share a terminal on the chassis. Alright, and then looking at the back side of our ignition, so let's call 15 position, let's call that the top just for reference. So we have our medium red wire plugging in there, that's location. Then our heavy red is going to go to our number 30 terminal, and then our heavy yellow is going to plug into lower left corner there, number 50. And then this yellow on the outside, position number 54. That is yellow wire going to our radio. And then back tracing those wires out of the ignition switch into our harness. You can see the correct position there. And then our light switch harness coming out of the terminal there into the switch. That's what that guy looks like. And then let me just try and rotate this And then you just have to pick a point on here that we can focus in on with some lighting as far as positioning goes. And I'll just rotate it real slow, and then you can pause the video if you need to and write down the positions of the wires. So our two heavy reds are going right into the top of that notch there, coming out of the harness there. And then as we rotate, looks like a gray to the left of it and a gray-red below that guy. And then on the other side of those reds we have a white-green, a black, and another gray. Alright, let's take it outside and put her in. Okay, so we'll put our light switch in first. It's got a spacer on there. That's going to go behind the dash. Right to there. And then coming out of our column terminal, we got white and black going to light switch terminal number 1, this blank one right here. And then next we put the thin washer, followed by the escutcheon. I'll go ahead and tighten that down, then we'll just thread the knob on. And then following out of our light switch, back into our harness, and then up into our connections here. And then noting the position of the A connection. And then plugging in our column harness B and C wires into our ignition. Okay, so everything's all plugged in now. I'm going to leave everything labeled on these wires until I've gone through a sufficient amount of troubleshooting. I feel confident I can pull those labels off. So all we have left now coming out of there is just a radio wire to there and a cigarette lighter. This guy and this guy here. And then here's our cigarette lighter. So then installing our ignition switch, we put the spacers behind the locking tab there. See the little embossed top and bottom prongs there. So what those do, they lock into the dashboard at a particular angle in relation to the switch being upright. And then that locks that in, so when you turn the key, your ignition switch doesn't slide. Okay, so you can see them locking in there. That's the position. So then we just thread down our escutcheon, and that should do it. And there's our finished look. And then our cigarette lighter connections. And then you can see the terminal coming off the body there. Only thing with that guy, you just want to make sure you got the terminal scraped real clean, don't have any paint on there. Get a really good ground. And then we'll go ahead and clean up all these wires, tie them off when we have done all our troubleshooting. And then one last look, our finished product. Just got one lead coming off there for our radio. One red and white going to who knows where. Alright, everything's looking real good. Also, you can see now, get our windshield wiper motor in there and plenum, how tight everything's getting inside, up under the dash. Okay guys, I think we're going to go ahead and call it good for this one. Got a few more bits and pieces still to go here on the inside. We'll do one last review once we get everything in place. Then we need to roll on to the outside of these fenders and hook up all our horn bracket and connections for horn brackets. And then also on this side we're going to have a radio antenna and a fuel spout going in there. We can conclude all that on the next video. But from here I think I can actually start doing some of the troubleshooting. We got a battery now we can hook up some juice and see if things will actually work. Well, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.